George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Hello, everyone. I am very honored to be hosting the show today, filling in for my friend George. Today, I will have the honor of interviewing two extraordinary guests. First, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, a Palestinian activist and a politician. And then after that, I'm going to have the pleasure to talk with my fellow Brazilian friend, Pepe Escobar. He's a famous journalist and geopolitical analyst. This is the mother of all talk shows, and I am Diego Ruzzarin.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
So today is the 8th of January of the year 2025. We are now officially closer to the year 2050 than we are to the year 2000. Let that sink in. We are at a turning point. Antonio Gramsci, an Italian philosopher, once said, "The new has not fully been born, and the old has not fully died. Monsters and aberrations will emerge." And this is our current situation. The new, when we mean by this idea from Gramsci, is potentially BRICS, a potential multilateral world that breaks the current capital hegemony. But this idea is not fully born, is not stable enough. So at the same time, it has to coexist with something that has not fully died yet. And this, what I mean that it has not fully died, is the decaying liberal order that is now in crumbles. The trust in institutions and democracy is in record lows. As people suffer material conditions while voting for very insignificant matters that don't really change anything, we are trapped in this conundrum. The world today is defined by the monsters that are born out of these contradictions. At the same time, the leaders of liberal, developed democracies wage wars in the name of capital, their only true God. Presidents and leaders with historical low levels of popular approval, having betrayed the working class, are pointing fingers everywhere and engaging virtual signaling, criticizing alternative models around the world, leaving us with no hope for change, with nothing to aspire to, trapped in this repetition and in the drug of nostalgia, something that we can never achieve truly. They manipulate the discourse, accusing their enemies of terrorism and dictatorship while branding themselves as the defenders of freedom and progress, and how much evil they have done in the name of freedom and progress, when in reality, this freedom is a freedom for depravity and decay. And this progress is a progress towards more addiction and misery. While us, the working people, the everyday individual, we are trapped in a life where it's every day more difficult to actually find any sort of dignity. A defining factor of this year, 2024-25, is going to be the growing role of social media in the rise of techno-feudal lords and their political stage. Let me give you two examples. First, Mark Zuckerberg, the head behind Meta, Facebook, and Instagram. He's trying to shape public discourse under the guise of defending free speech. He's censoring political criticism while promoting something very vague that he calls civic content. Whatever civic content means. And here we must remember another philosopher, Walter Benjamin, that he reminded us of the importance of politicizing the aesthetics. There is nothing that escapes the political realm. All these decisions have very deep political implications. Every time we talk about what is civil and what is not civil, what can be said or what needs to be censored, all of those things have very, very deep political implications. A second example that is actually much more worrying is the example of Elon Musk. Elon Musk arguably is one of the most inept and dangerous individuals alive. He has finally removed his masks, revealing himself as a true embodiment of the corrosive effects of capital on politics. All of this finally creates a perfect storm as we witness in real time something that may be as well the greatest shame of our generation, the genocide of the Palestinian people. We are here today to use critical thinking to confront these challenges. This is Moat. Welcome to our show.
On the line is Rose in Texas. was at the beginning of a song, on Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
My friends, we're back for this second part of my conversation. Again, I am Diego Ruzzarin. I'm filling in for my very good friend, George Galloway. I'm so thankful for this opportunity. And I also wanted to comment that the year 2024 was famous in the fact that it was the year of democracy. It was the year in which the most amount of countries conducted democratic elections around the world at the same time. So we all voted, we participated, we were all part of this very big circus of supposed controlled dissidence and controlled change. Having said that, whatever we voted on 2024, we're going to see those effects going into full power now in 2025. And one of those that we cannot absolutely rule out is the rise of Donald Trump. Let's say the return of Donald Trump to power. And I think this is probably going to be one of the key aspects that is going to be determining geopolitics around the world, because now we see Donald Trump coming up again to power with a very different attitude. We see a return of imperialism like we haven't seen before in a very long time. And I think this is especially important. So we're having this conversation today because the effects of Donald Trump reaching power for the second time are much more nefarious than they can immediately look. What do I mean by this? Let's say you're listening to this show from Latin America, from South America. Donald Trump has made statements in the past few days regarding taking back the Channel of Panama, which already Panama is almost like a pariah state that was used as a military base. And now Trump is using these power words as raising tariffs and imposing sanctions because he wants to take control of the Panama Canal. He has also made very, very aggressive and violent remarks towards Mexico, making comments about renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. But this doesn't stop in America. Donald Trump has set his eyes also as adding Canada as the 51st state of the United States of America, and he's now in a bidding war to take control of Greenland. All of this even before taking power. So I think what we can expect out of Donald Trump is going to be at least very interesting content. But beyond that, of course, it becomes very dangerous because this also has, as we understand the story of the United States, a country that has been a war for the last 2 centuries without a break, that these words are not in the void. They may have bellical, physical, and violent implications. And of course, this also has an effect for Europe. I hope people now in Europe are waking up to the fact that having the US as an ally is even worse than having the US as an enemy. This is not me saying this. It was said by Harry Kissinger, one of the main political players in the history of the country. So now that we are seeing all these facts, that we are listening to the inflammatory discourse coming from Donald Trump, we have to be very critical. We have to be very acute, and we have to be ready to understand what those words will trigger and what will they imply as a plan that is taking place behind Donald Trump. So we are going to continue this conversation regarding geopolitical implications after the big year of democracy and being in this year of a big transition towards the end of a global hegemony and the birth of a new potential multipolar world with our guests today. I will remind you, I am Diego Ruzzarin. I'm just filling in for my friend George Galloway. I'm very thankful for this opportunity. And today we're going to be interviewing Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, a Palestinian, and my Brazilian friend Pepe Escobar, a renewed journalist and geopolitical analyst. We are here at the mother of all talk shows.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
So at the moment, we are conducting a poll for our listeners today regarding this cover-up child sex abuse story that has been blowing up in the last few weeks, especially in the UK. The news has been very troubling and is a very sensitive issue, but there's so many powerful people involved regarding this scandal, and the number of victims is growing every day. Every time we get closer to the story, we just uncover more and more grotesque details that we don't really want to find out about. So I'm going to share with you a couple of numbers that you can dial in order to share your comments with us, and I will share with you right now where we are regarding what do you feel about this story. Do you think this has been a cover-up story? Do you think there's some reality to the claims? Do you think this is a framing going on? Are they trying to divert our attention while something bigger is happening on the background? Because we are very much accustomed to the fact that media is not only used to inform, but very much to distract. So I want to hear your opinion about this. Do you think this child sex abuse story, it's a cover-up, or there's some reality behind it? I'm going to give you the numbers. If you guys are calling from the UK, you can dial the number, well, it's actually on the screen right now. From the UK is 08081 965522. If you're dialing from the US, if you're dialing from the US, you can dial +1 84944 3344. And I want to know your opinion, your take. How much do you know about this story? Do you think we are being distracted? Is this a cover-up, or there's some reality behind it? Okay. So now on line one, actually, they just informed me we have Terence on line one for a call. Okay. No, it seems we lost Terence on the call. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so we go directly into our first guest, Dr. Mustafa. I'm going to introduce him when he's live. We're just trying to connect with him. He's in Palestine, if I'm not wrong. There we go. Hello, Dr. Mustafa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
So let me introduce you to the people. This is Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He's a Palestinian physician, activist, and a politician who serves as the General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative. He has been a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council since 2006, and is also a member of the Palestinian Liberation Organization Central Council. Dr. Mustafa, thank you so much for the opportunity and for being at MOATS. How are you today?
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
Same. So we are almost 500 days into this monstrous siege of the Palestinian people. Even from afar, let me tell you, from Latin America, you have our deepest empathy and solidarity. And for those listening, tell us where we are today in regard specifically to the conditions of the people of Gaza.
Well, we are in the most horrible condition anywhere in the world. The people of Gaza, and we are talking about at least 2.2 million people, and at least 2 million are now in Gaza, are suffering from 3 war crimes that are taking place at the same time. The war crime of genocide, the war crime of collective punishment, including starving people, and the war crime of ethnic cleansing. 4 major cities have been erased to the ground completely. 90% of the people have been ethnically cleansed and forced to leave their homes and are displaced in living in most horrible conditions, without proper food, without clean water, without sufficient medical care, and without shelters. Basically, they're living mostly in tents. And these tents collapse when there is rain or there is wind, as we have had during the last 2 weeks. And on average, every Gazan gets sick 3 times a month. We have 76 medical teams working with Palestinian Medical Relief Society, which I relate to. And these 76 medical teams tell us that who treat about 200,000 people every month, tell us that they are lacking medications, they are lacking medical facilities. They have to take care of many injured people because hospitals cannot cope with all the injured people, and they don't have enough material for dressing. Most importantly, we are talking about a genocide, because no less than 55,000 people have been killed, including 17,000 children, and including at least 13,000 women, and 108,000 people have been injured. If you put this figure together, you are talking about 9% of the population of Gaza. 9% is a huge number. You can apply it to any country. If proportionally you are talking about the United States of America, this means 30 million people killed or injured in less than 15 months. As a matter of fact, the number of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 15 months is larger than all Americans killed in all American wars since independence in the United States. So that gives you an idea about the scope. 87,000 tons of explosives have been thrown on Gaza, which means 36 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child. It's a terrible situation, and the siege is horrible. Tedros, the Secretary General of the World Health Organization, he just announced that at least 16,000 Palestinians in Gaza are in urgent conditions. They are suffering from critical health situation, and they need immediate evacuation, otherwise they will die. And Israel is preventing them from being evacuated. So, according to World Health, to UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, what gets to Gaza in terms of humanitarian aid is no more than 6% of its needs. So it's a disaster in every sense of the word. And any country that continues to support Israel with military equipment like Britain, United States, Germany, and others is a participant, not only complicit, but a participant in these war crimes.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Mustafa, this is truly heartbreaking. Every time we listen to, again, the statistics, the numbers, the amount, the death, and the complexity of the suffering, it's almost impossible not to be moved by these stories. I appreciate very much the recapitulation of this catastrophe, of this genocide. Having said that, I also can empathize with the fact that being a doctor, being committed to saving life, having this promise, this deep vow of the protection of life must be especially painful for you to witness this inhumanity that is going on. Having said that, do you think that the suffering of the Palestinian people, in a way, it's a signal of the failure of international institution? Is this the end of a liberal order that portrayed itself as a humanist paradigm with all the double standards, hypocrisy, the constant violation of international law? Do we finally see that the justice as a concept, it's only for the strong, the violent, and the brutal?
Well, yes, of course, I totally agree. But more than that, I think as Gaza has exposed the world and has exposed completely the so-called world international order. Gaza has revealed the truth and the fact that there is no international law. And there is no international humanitarian law. These laws are applied selectively when it's politically in the interest of Western governments. They apply it, like in the case of Ukraine and Russia. But when it is not in their interest, or when it conflicts with one of their allies, like in this case Israel, they allow Israel to be above the law, above international law, above international humanitarian law. And that means we are witnessing the end of the so-called international order that was created after the Second World War. It's as large as that. And maybe there are other atrocities that happened in other parts of the world, for sure. The difference between those things and what happens in Gaza is that in the case of Gaza, this is happening with the whole world watching, and it is on social media and on TV screens. People can see the massacres. They can see the war crimes taking place. So in Iraq, horrible things happened. In Libya, terrible things happened. Definitely in Sudan, terrible things happened. But nobody has seen the atrocity in process as it is today. And everybody have witnessed how countries like the United States of government, like some other Western governments, trying to cover up the crime and continuing to support Israel. For instance, out of the 87,000 tons of explosives that were thrown on Gaza, 50,000 came from the United States after the 7th of October. I mean, and the rest probably came also from the United States. So we are talking about participation in these war crimes. And the fact that Israel was allowed to do all of that reveals and shows that we are not really having any international law in effect. What we see is double standard and continuous double standard. I'll give you one more example. This morning, an Israeli plane conducted an airstrike on a Palestinian village called Tammoun in north of the West Bank, not Gaza. And they bombarded and killed 2 children. One was 8 years old, one was 10 years old, and another young man who was 23 years old. And then Israel claimed they were fighting militants. 8 years old? I mean, The fact that Israel, which is occupying us in the West Bank, we are under Israeli military occupation, and they still use their army and their air force to bombard us, who are under occupation. There is no bigger violation of international law as this one. Still, have you heard of any criticism from the British government, from the German government, from the United States government? Of course not. And this is not the first time they do it. They have repeated that in Tulkarem, in Jenin, and in so many other areas in the West Bank. We've lost already in the West Bank more than 835 people since October 7th. 12,000 Palestinians in the West Bank have been put in jail. 3,500 of them don't know why. Because they are under the so-called administrative detention, which means Israel can withhold them for years without even charging them, without them or their lawyers knowing why they are put in jail. It's the worst place on earth where human rights are so much violated. That's the reality of our life.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's absolutely insane to see international law being instrumentalized to defend the aggressor, to defend the colonizer, in order to enable the violence to continue and to become.
Yeah, and there are a couple of issues that, more than a couple, but let me raise a couple of issues here. They speak about self-defense and the right of self-defense. They say that Israel has the right to self-defense. When was the occupier? Which law in the world says that the occupier has the right to defend itself, but the occupied does not have the right to defend itself? Why it is exclusive for Israel, the right of self-defense? Why we, the Palestinians who are under Israeli occupation, are not allowed to defend ourselves? That is a big question to all Western leaders. And then the second question, are we equal human beings or not? Why we are treated as subhumans? Why this level of dehumanization of Palestinians that is definitely accepted by most Western governments? It's amazing. And I always raise the issue, what's the difference between Anna Frank, who was a Jewish young girl who was killed by the German Gestapo of the Nazi regime in Holland, and Hind Rajab, who was a Palestinian 6-year-old child who was stuck in a car with 6 members of her family. She witnessed how they were killed one after the other. And for 3 hours, and this was recorded, she was calling for an ambulance and screaming and complaining and crying for 3 hours. And when the ambulance managed to get to her, the ambulance was bombarded and she was bombarded and killed. To me, Anna Frank, a Jewish young girl, and Hind Rajab, a Palestinian young girl, are the same. They both suffered from the same atrocity of those who are in power, who have no respect to people's lives and no respect to children's life. That is the reality of what we live in.
Absolutely. And as I listen to you, I recall text from Edgar Said, and this notion of how the invaders even constitute the subjectivity of those being colonized, and the accumulative effect that is going to have on the next generations after this much pain, this much suffering, this much grotesque lack of humanity. I think we're now seeing the immediate, tangible, physical violence, but the violence is going to be perpetuated in the new subjectivities that is going to emerge out of this trauma. I think we have to be very much aware that this is not by any means an end to the violence, the aggression, and the suffering we will see for generations to come. I still believe that this is going to be probably the shame of our generation, to have witnesses, as you said, in real time, through social media, all the videos, everything is available, everything is in this form of a spectacle, yet people do nothing. As you said, most powerful politicians and people in a place of power, they're doing very, very little. Regarding that specific point, before moving forward, Doctor, if you allow me, what's your read on the control and censorship of information? Because there's this famous book from John Baudrillard called The Gulf War Never Took Place, where he explains, as you were mentioned, that in the 90s, we had the first relationship with war through television. but this is probably our first experience as a collective society of an experience of genocide mediated through social media. So what's your understanding of this effect? How are we living this experience, and how we can, in a way, resist this banalization of violence?
Well, we live in a struggle. I mean, there is a struggle, continuous struggle, nonstop, about the narrative, about the facts, about the information. And from one side, you have mainstream Western media not providing coverage of what's happening in Gaza. Of course, sometimes they show things, but frequently they don't. And they ignore the fact that Israel prohibited all Western journalists and all journalists completely. All foreign journalists were prohibited from entering Gaza, with the exception of one who managed to sneak in from CNN for 3 hours only, and then she was forced to leave. So for 15 months, this is the only war in modern history that was not covered by military correspondents that usually go to war zones and war areas. The only one. And in addition to that, in the process of their attacks, the Israeli army has killed up till now 203 Palestinian journalists to silence them, to prevent them from showing the truth and reality. 203 is the largest number of journalists killed ever, any time in history. And on top of that, of course, there is suppression of social media. I myself have suffered from that. My YouTube station was closed down by the YouTube. I mean, why? I don't understand. But because it reached a certain level of popularity and it was very widely watched, they just shut it down. So what we see here is a constant struggle. From one side, you have Palestinian young people, Palestinian heroic journalists, doing their best to bring out the reality, to expose what's happening, to show what's happening. And there are certain channels that have been heroic also in doing that, like Al Jazeera, for instance. And on the other hand, you see constant efforts to cover up what's happening and to mislead the world with the Israeli narrative. We don't have much resources. I personally have to broadcast every day a message or two to the international journalists in Palestine. Nobody is supporting me. I'm doing this on voluntary basis. But on the other hand, Israel has 3 major institutions supported with hundreds of millions of dollars that constantly keep bombarding foreign journalists with information and media and et cetera, et cetera. I say to my colleagues usually, all we need is 5% of their effort because the truth is on our side. But this 5% have to be done. And that's why we are engaged in a continuous struggle between us and those who are trying to mislead the world, between us and those who are complicit with the crimes by being silent about what's happening.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Mustafa, there's a couple of geopolitical events in this year 2025 that I would like to have your take on how they affect the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. First is the presidency of Donald Trump. Do you think the president of Donald Trump and the Republicans as a whole will change the direction or the intensity or the velocity of the genocide? Or do you think that the United States of America is fully submitted to Zionism and they won't have anything to do with it?
The answer is no and yes. No, because there isn't really much difference between Biden and Trump. And because Biden has done everything he could, he and his administration, his Zionist administration, they've done everything they could to support genocide. And they've been participants in the genocide. This man gave Israel $40 billion of military equipment and weapons and equipment and bombs to kill Palestinians and to kill Syrians and to kill Lebanese people and to kill Yemeni people. and he doesn't care about the lives of Palestinians. And he's been a liar. He lied constantly, adopting Israeli lies, like decapitation of children or raping women and so on. Although Israel, many Western media outlets like CNN and Wall Street Journal and Los Angeles Times denied these accusations, he still repeated them. And he tried to provide cover to Israel all the time. So what's the difference between Biden and Trump? On this regard, they're all the same in the sense that they are absolutely and totally biased to Israel. Yet, the answer is also yes, because Trump is promising very dangerous things like expanding the borders of Israel, because he discovered that Israel is a small country, as he says. That means killing the idea of a Palestinian state and annexing the rest of our territory. He is threatening us with hell, although I responded by saying that we already live in hell when you look at Gaza and what's happening there. But the worst thing that could happen is that he could support Netanyahu's efforts to annex completely the West Bank and kill finally any possibility or chance for the so-called two-state solution. And annexation is a very dangerous matter. Another very high, there are two risks under Trump's administration: annexation, but also ethnic cleansing, a complete and total ethnic cleansing of Gaza. That's a very high risk that we should be watching for and do everything we can to prevent it. Some of the appointments of Mr. Trump are very alarming, like the appointment of Mike Huckabee to become, who was appointed to be the American ambassador to Israel. Mr. Huckabee said, there are no Palestinians. Palestinians are an invention to steal the land of Israel. So we don't exist for Mr. Huckabee. You are talking to a non-existent person now, according to him. We are an invention. This is the kind of mentality of people who say that they are Zionist and they are unapologetic about it and about supporting Israel. So a whole group of people are coming with Trump that are absolutely and totally not only supportive of Israel, but supportive of the crimes of Israel. So yes, there is a risk there, and we have to be unified and united and stand up to these risks. But also we need the support and solidarity of every person in the world who believes in humanity and believes in the rights of the people to be free.
Absolutely. It's also appalling to see how it's as if they were measuring the waters and the ability to impose this violence and commit these war crimes and see the response in real time. And as the international community mostly remain muted towards the genocide, it's as if they validated the fact that they can escalate the conflict to ethnic cleansing without any repercussions. So this is, I agree 100% with you. This is the time to truly raise the alarm and sum as many voices as we can. I would like to answer something, or actually question you on something that you mentioned, because you brought up the question of Syria. So regarding the fall of Assad and the impact of Syria, what is your assessment regarding the potential distribution of the Syrian territories between Turkey and Israel, and how this can influence even more the ongoing genocide?
What worries me, and I was the first person probably who alarmed the Syrian people and the world in general to what Israel was doing. What worries me is that Israel has expanded its occupation to include not only all of the Golan Heights and the huge geographical areas and very strategic areas in Syria, but they went as far as occupying hundreds of kilometers, of squared kilometers, and they are now standing at a point which is only 12 kilometers away from Damascus. Not only that, they conducted after the fall of the Syrian regime, they conducted no less than 480 major, huge airstrikes. Excuse me. And that has led to the destruction of the whole Syrian army, the navy, the air force, the military, everything. Syria now is without defense, not only in front of Israel, but in front of any country that would invade Syria. So we are also, and our worry is about the fact that there is very little reaction to what Israel has done. So yes, of course we are worried. We're worried about that, and we are also worried about the fact that Syria could be driven into internal war. We want the best for the Syrian people. We want democracy for the Syrian people. We don't agree with the crimes of the dictatorship that were committed before. But that, at the same time, we are worried that Syria could be divided and destroyed, and especially by Israel. And that's why we call on the Syrian people to be unified, to defend its country, and to prevent Israel from proceeding with its plans. I think I have to leave you here because I have another commitment, if you allow.
Absolutely. Dr. Mustafa, thank you so much. And you mentioned that we have to sum voices and raise the awareness as much as possible. I have a quite large following in Latin America. My channel is yours. Anytime you want to have a conversation on this, you're more than welcome in my channels as well.
Please convey our best regards to our comrades and friends and brothers in Latin America. I recently met with the foreign minister of Colombia, and we're very proud of their position, but also Chile and many other countries that have been very supportive of Palestinian rights. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Have a great day. So that's Dr. Mustafa for us, such a moving and touching conversation. And he mentioned for us the importance of remembering the Palestinian community, the Palestinian heritage, the Palestinian history that is now intended to be erased from history. And as we have mentioned so many philosophers today, I remember Walter Benjamin saying that history is told by the victors. But we will never truly understand history unless we recover the voices of the victims, the voices of the defeated. And that's why I actually had selected a little bit of poetry from a Palestinian writer that I love, that it goes like this. It says, "In order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I must listen to the birds. And in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent." It's kind of hard to do poetry and do arts and think about something else where you're being bombarded all the time and being in peril every day and fearing for your life since you are young children. I'm very empathic to this conflict. I hope you guys can empathize with the struggle, and we can raise awareness to the topic. Thank you so much for this interview. We'll be right back with our next guest.
President Putin definitely isn't Nikita Khrushchev, who was a clown, in my opinion. Neither is he Stalin, but he's much closer to Stalin than any other Russian leader has ever been. He has a mind that calamity has hardened and turned to steel. He is extremely cautious, but cautious only for a purpose. He is cautious in the hope that the goals of the operation that he's involved the country in can be achieved. But no one should mistake that caution for weakness. I've met the man. 3 times I've met him. I've met lots of leaders. I've met leaders from all over the world, including all of the British leaders that I sat in Parliament under. Vladimir Putin is a very determined guy. He has a clear set of goals. He told you about them in 2007 in Munich. He warned you in 2007 that Russia regarded NATO encroachment in Ukraine as a red line matter for the existential survival of the Russian Federation, which it is his job to defend, and nobody should make the mistake of thinking that he will not do that job. People misunderestimated Stalin, but Stalin wasn't Stalin when he told the beast of Berlin that we will crush you in your lair. Stalin wasn't Stalin. Putin isn't Stalin. Trust me on that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So, hello everyone, welcome back to MOATS. We are almost halfway through our show today. Let me remind you, I'm your guest. I'm standing in for our friend George Galloway today. And actually, I met George in Russia recently because we were covering the BRICS Forum 2024. And it was a very interesting opportunity. We were both invited to comment and give lectures and interviews and cover the event. So I had the opportunity to have a discussion with George. It went fantastically. And now we have become very close friends to the point where he's leaving me his child in my care, and I'm hope I'm doing an okay job to it. To the people that haven't heard about me before or seen me before, I'm actually a Brazilian, but I'm based in Mexico. I'm a geopolitical analyst by formation, and I'm currently doing my PhD in studies in critical theory and post-structuralism. So I'm a very big fan of philosophy. You will hear a lot of fancy names and maybe some fancy words here and there because I like to complicate things, and not just for the sake of complication, which is fun in itself, but also because reality is rarely as simple as it looks. So I like to bring in some angles from philosophy, critical thinking, psychoanalysis, so we can have extra tools in order to better understand the reality and the complexity of our current situation. Having said that, I'm informed that we're going to have another call from a fan, from a listener, before we go into our next interview. And to remind you guys, you can follow us in our social media at Mother of All Talk Shows, MOATS. You can also follow George Galloway. You can follow myself, Diego Ruzzarin, in every social media. If you're interested in content in Spanish, in English, about political philosophy, about geopolitics in itself, or if you're just interested of being informed in current events, please remember to follow us everywhere you can, because we are at constant war with censorship and being blocked of expressing our opinions around the world. So we are going to go now for the call, and I'm informed it's from Mr. Terence from Corby.
Hello, Mr. Ruzzarin. It's been a pleasure to listen to your introduction. First and foremost, I'd like to tell you that Mr. Barghouti, Dr. Barghouti, is magnificent, and Sinn Féin in Ireland stand by him resolutely. His spokesperson was at the Ardèche in Ireland. She spoke brilliantly, brought most people to tears. The Irish people, with any political thought, are right behind the Palestinians. Coming back to your initial point where you mentioned one of my favorite philosophers, Antonio Gramsci, for the old to be born, the new must be got rid of, let's say, in a nice way. And you led into the BRICS point of view there. My view on BRICS is that I'd like to see it work. I think there are lots of potholes ahead. I think Saudi Arabia would be the biggest pothole for me, with its attachment to America and all the Arab states there. And to go forward, I think the biggest plus mark of all, shows like Mr. Galloway's, shows like yours, Mr. Ruzzarin, around the world. The truth is out there. The people that want to know the truth can see the truth. They can't kick it, they can't burn it, they can't bury it. It's there. And again, back to the eminent Dr. Barghouti, the Irish people, of which I'm proud to say I'm a third generation Irish. My surname is O'Brien, first Kings of Ireland, which means nothing. But in Palestine, we see it, we feel it, and we voice it. I think BRICS is a rocky road, but it's well worth the effort to get rid of the canker and the narratives that are being displayed around the world on the square boxes in people's rooms, and that they are believing the truth is there. Just open your eyes. Over to you, sir.
Flawless, incredible. Terence, my friend, thank you so much for the content. Such a pleasure to hear. First, let me recognize the power and the resistance of the people of Ireland. You have my full appreciation. It's always good to know we're on the same side, the right side of history. Having said that, regarding your comment towards Gramsci at the beginning, and this notion that the truth is going to win at the end. Let me just tell you this from a Marxist point of view. Materiality is persistent. In a way, we can be trapped under propaganda. We can be distracted by dissimulative discourses. We can be, in a way, deviated from the truth. But materiality is persistence. And in that sense, I place my faith next to yours in this bumpy road that we have ahead of us, trying to build an alternative world order, an alternative non-hegemonic, multipolar, with several fronts of opportunities for different models to emerge. And this is why we believe in BRICS, and I think I'm with you in here. Mr. Terence, thank you so much for your call. Thank you so much for your content. And I can feel the warmth, even being from South America, I can feel the warmth all the way from Ireland. Thank you so much. So now I think we're going to go to some YouTube comments. And if you guys want to comment, we're going to place a QR code on screen and you can leave your comment on our YouTube channel. Keep it clean. We'll read it on the air and I will be reading some of the comments here. The QR, you can see it right now on the screen, and I will try to engage as much as possible, because in the end, social media creates this artificial distance between the ones speaking and the ones listening. And just like listening to the voice of Terence calling us from Kirby, it was so refreshing. I wish social media has a little bit more of that we could actually engage in more conversations, because social media, different from other medias, it tends to place a wider gap between the communicator and the listeners. I think we're so much farther apart. In a way, my voice reaches so many more people, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to create a proper dialogue or a space for debate. So use this opportunity, be gentle, be respectful, be educated, scan that QR code and send us our comment, and we'll be reading them out. So I have a comment here from Matome Mohala. As a South African, my pain for the people of Gaza runs deep. I think we share that empathy. Thank you so much for your comment, Mr. Matome. Well, I think we have another one that we can choose here. We have a comment now from Lyndon Wilson. Says, Anna Bedrock said that Israel was justified in targeting civilians and hospitals. What can we say about this? Again, it feels like from a Chomsky point of view, in a way, power justifies logic, not the other way around. It's not logic that gives, in a way, sustenance to the decisions of power. It's the other way around. It's the master discourse that is being imposed and then a posteriori being justified by intellectuals and politicians and people in places of power. So I agree with you, with your comment, in the sense that we have to be critical, because power creates its own reason. We have to be critical to deconstruct that reason and reveal injustices. Thank you so much for your comment, Paul. Now we go to, Paul Railton says, you can only carry out crimes like Israel if you believe you're a master race. Well, what can we say about this? This has been commented so many times. It's even written in their scriptures. They go back so much to this notion that they are the chosen people. And in a way, I think this critique and this comment about the notion of the existence of a master race can also serve us to be self-critical about the notion of the illustrated reasonable human from the illustration period. In a way, I think we're dragging along these antiquated notions that we are above animals, that we have reason that is above unreason, that we have freedom, and those that don't have freedom are not human. We have culture, so we're better than nature. We have reason, so we're better than the unreasonable. We have freedom, so we are better than the non-free. But these distinctions, these exclusions, they also create rational justifications to carry out atrocities. And in a way, the story of the illustrated man, the modern man, that is still the metaphysical notion of man under liberalism, has been the core reasonable justification to carry out atrocities. So I hope we can take your comments seriously, Mr. Paul, in order to reflect back on the implicit metaphysical meanings on the individual rational man of liberalism, because it implies the same possibility to impose violence on those excluded out of the category of human. We'll go now to the comment from Nell Lowe. It says, the world owes Palestine a great debt for showing us just how corrupt and evil our governments and institutions are. I couldn't agree more, Mr. Lowe. I think this is exactly the point. It in a way, it places the concept of justice, the concept of equality, and the concept of humanity under a very truthful light. We are now unable to go back and look at international institutions under the same optic as we are today. Because today we know for a fact, we don't think, it's not an opinion, we know for a fact that international institutions are constantly being instrumentalized to carry out the will of the powerful. And in that sense, once this fantasy is shattered in front of us, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do now? How do we rebuild back? Is there something to be recovered? Is it something to be saved? Or do we have to fully rethink about the way we deal with international institutions? Because today, as you very much place in your comment, international institutions only respond to the interest of powerfuls. That's it. They don't respond to the interest of humanity. They are not accountable for any sort of justice or humanity. They only respond to the interest of power. Thank you so much for your comment. And the last one from Neil Curry, he says, the fact that what Dr. Barghouti just said, it will be derided as anti-Semitic by upper management of so many nations, speak volumes on their own sense of supremacy. I agree. I think this scapegoatism of using anti-Semitism as a defense for criticism is getting thinner and thinner. I think they will still use it because it's a powerful tool. They will just call you an anti-Semite and they will try to take away the microphone from you and they will censor your social media. They will take your sponsorships or your opportunity to speak because they will try to destroy your character. But this is a last resort. I think it's because they can no longer appeal to any rationality that they have to appeal to this type of a dominant character assassinations. So it means that we're getting close to the end of potential rational discourse. Again, we have to ask ourselves what is next, because this was never about rationality. This was always about force. So we have to think about what is next. Thank you so much for your comments. It's always a pleasure to interact and hear your points of view. Very, very interesting notions ahead. Remember, you can scan the QR code to leave more comments on the YouTube channel. We'll keep reading them. And I think we're almost ready for our next guest. Just 1 second. Remember, you can download the MOATS podcast this week. Here is some news on your downloads. We are in the top 15 in Ireland, top 30 in South Africa, Spain, Greece, and Hong Kong, as well as top 5 in UAE and Bulgaria. Again, this week, you can download the Mother of All podcasts by scanning the QR code on your screen now, and you can listen to the weekly podcast via moats.tv in the website in your browser. So, guys, now we're going to get ready and we're going to prepare for our next guest. We're going to have Pepe Escobar, a Brazilian like myself, which I'm very, very excited to talk about, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Go ahead, John.
You recognize that, mass immigration is driven by wars and that ultimately, people ought to be repatriated and the conditions, and so on need to be laid to facilitate that. But I feel like it doesn't fully address, the concerns of people who are not happy with the exponentially rising levels of immigration. They don't necessarily feel like they have a duty to go about understanding it and wrapping their head around all the complexities of international politics. They just know that they want their country to be, to culturally sort of resemble what their country nominally is. And I suppose it puts you to some extent in an inconvenient spot, given, you know, where you found the most political strength and the demographics and so on. But, you know, I don't know.
Like, any spot. No, John, it doesn't put me in any spot at all. And even if it did, you think I would change my answer because it put me in a spot? I say things because I believe that they are right. The issue of immigration and the issue of refugees are not the same thing. And neither of them is the same thing as color or race or ethnicity. These are all different things. I was born and grew up before there was mass immigration, and Britain was lousy. It was lousy. All these culture wars have always raged. You just know about them more now. Now, I'm against mass immigration. Nothing to do with color or race, ethnicity or culture. It's about economics. The only people who are in favor of mass immigration are lunatic liberals, anarchists, and rich monopoly capitalists. That's obvious, isn't it? So I'm against mass immigration because in a capitalist society, that can only worsen the terms and conditions of my members, of the working class that I try to represent and champion.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Again, I'm constantly reminded I'm not George Galloway. I'm filling in for my friend George. My name is Diego Ruzzarin. I'm a Brazilian. I'm a geopolitical analyst, a philosopher, and passionate about critical thinking and understanding how we can apply old people's dead people theory to current events. So having said that, I'm so glad to be here. And the next conversation I'm very excited about. I'm gonna be talking to my friend Pepe Escobar. He's a Brazilian journalist, geopolitical analyst, a true independent journalist. And I feel I must make this distinction as talent such as yours are becoming more and more rare and more valuable. Your voice, your vision as a journalist, as a geopolitical analyst is fundamental in times such as this. Meu amigo Pepe, tudo bem?
E aí, meu, tudo bem? Okay, we start in Portuguese and we switch to the international operating system. Yes, it's a pleasure to be with you. And I am in NATO-stan at the moment. On the other side of the English Channel, by the way, I'm in Paris, which is one of my three homes. And basically, all of you, our audience, it sucks. This is the geopolitical headline of the day.
Awesome, great. We can call it a show. That was perfect. Now we can talk about the important things. Let's discuss old philosophy and poetry. Yeah. That was No, just kidding. Pepe, going right into some of the topics because I have some spicy questions for you today. First, I would like to talk to you about the fall of Syria and the use of this example of the fall of Syria to ask about your opinion on the instrumentalization of the word dictatorship as this universal target that NATO uses to justify violence and interference, and also to build pipelines, of course.
Of course, you're a dictator if you are against the rules-based international order. You can be a head shopper and you have a new Hugo Boss suit and tie, and then you are a moderate rebel. That's how it works, essentially. So a dictator is Xi Jinping, Ayatollah Khamenei, Vladimir Putin, Erdogan, etc. But never the green sweaty sweatshirt in Kiev. He's a democratic liberal leader, progressive leader. Doesn't matter if he's surrounded by neo-Nazis of all stripes, as we all know. Doesn't matter that he's mega corrupt and the people around him are mega corrupt. Doesn't matter. Well, the thing is, will the rules-based international order be subverted now from the inside by Trump himself? That's the surrealist scenario I'm interested at the moment. I've been discussing it for the past few days. Go ahead. Otherwise, I will go forever.
No. Yeah, I will not interrupt you. I promise. I'm very, very interested in your opinions. But I will leave Trump to the end because I think Trump, he's just so much good content. Like there's so much to talk about Trump that I'll leave it for the end of the interview. But regarding this situation in Syria, I'm very interested because I know you're very familiar with the region and the story and the conflicts and the different interests in the area. And I would like to ask you, how does this impact the tension in the region specifically? What can we expect in the coming weeks? And for the people in Europe, is this going to affect the immediate life of the regular working class people in Europe? Are we expected to see again an energy impact in cost of living, security? Because what people don't recall, and especially Americans that are very bad with geography, the war taking place in Ukraine for people living in the UK is like having a war in New York and you're based in Los Angeles. But people don't necessarily make these connections, and the Middle East is also not very far. So I would like to have your take on the immediate effect of these geopolitical conflicts on the everyday life of working people.
In Europe, not immediately. In West Asia, across West Asia, it's an earthquake already. We can soon have, and we have the lineaments of, let's say, the exploding, the end of the scenario of a spaghetti Western directed by Sergio Leone, of everybody shooting everybody else, which is what is already starting to happen. Victims for the moment are Alawites and Christians. Soon, victims will be all over the spectrum, including civilians in Damascus, civilians in Aleppo, secular civilians in Damascus and Aleppo. We're watching the partition of Syria, of the carcass of Syria, I would say, between the US, Turkey, and Israel. We all know this spells trouble. We have the possibility, I would say the flagrant possibility within the next few weeks of a NATO against NATO war in North and Northeast Syria. Turkish NATO trying to exterminate Kurds and SDF Kurds defended by the Americans. So if this is not surrealist enough, we're going to have the original Turkish project, which is to incorporate the industrial heartland of Syria, the Syria that really works. This is in the west part of Syria, the M5 highway from Aleppo to Damascus. This may unravel much quicker than we thought. One of the key reasons, nobody trusts Jolani. Never forget that this guy was the emir of ISIS in Nineveh. This is extremely important. The former emir of Al-Qaeda in the Levant. He is a reconstituted Al-Qaeda in the Levant, ISIS guy, founded his own umbrella, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, controlled by Turkish intelligence. He is the so-called leader of this new provisional government, which, by the way, and our audience should know this, every goddamn terrorist in Idlib is now part of this government as we speak. All the ministers, everybody surrounding Jolani. So this thing obviously cannot last. The Americans sooner or later are going to go crazy. The Israelis, obviously, and even the Turks. Just an extra bit of information. All those terrorist gangs that Jolani regimented to be fighting on his side in Idlib, there are 30, 40, even 50 different small groups. They are already very furious with him because he didn't proclaim an Islamic emirate. So they're going to turn against him as well. This means they're going to turn against the so-called provisional government in Damascus. So this is, to all of you, this is just the short story of all the horrors that awaits us in Syria. So obviously the repercussions in Syria and across West Asia will be much more hardcore than probable repercussions to Europe. And Europe doesn't even exist in this scenario. One single bit of people is enough. there was a conga line of visitors to talk to Hugo Boss Jolani, former Salafi jihadi head chopper. The Americans, the Turks, Kiev, the Ukrainians, and guess the last on the line? The Europeans, the foreign ministers of Germany and French, which were totally snubbed by Jolani in Damascus, starting with an Alena 360 degrees. So this means that Europe doesn't count, doesn't matter at all.
Very interesting, Pepe. So it's good to hear your recap, because now we know that they're truly a hardcore democratic Occidental fundamental social democracy at core, right? They're very well represented. They were very well.
The dictator is out.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's amazing to see. Oh my God! Finally, we found the guys that represent Occidental values in order to substitute against the evil dictatorship of Assad. I'm so happy, so happy. It turns out so well, perfectly, just as planned. And I think it gets illustrated perfectly by the, like you said, the diplomatic catastrophe of the visit of the Germany foreign minister. She was not even greeted. She was blurred out of the pictures. And what is insane to me is the amount of propaganda we have in our minds that justify that every time they use this. That's why I begin the interview by asking you, how long can we fall for this same old crappy story of, targeting governments that are alternative because they're dictatorships, and justify with democracy, freedom, and progress, whatever metaphysical meaning you apply to those concepts, in order to do interference, color revolutions, and substitutions of power. Do you think, how long can this game go on? Or are we the fringes? Are we the subalterns? Are we the weird ones?
No, because the empire of chaos, as I describe it for many years now, that was the title of my book published 11 years ago, Empire of Chaos. They are masters, most of all, of creating narratives, twisting narratives, spinning narratives, and imposing narratives. They are the masters of narrative and nothing else. The whole debacle in Ukraine, which is essentially the collective West losing a war against Russia, throwing everything that they had and they didn't have, or they suppose they had against Russia, blow back, and they will lose the war in Ukraine. The terms of the capitulation of Ukraine, it's another story. But the fact is, we already know the fact, the great geopolitical fact, the defeat of the collective West faced with Russia. And something that I have been quoting this week in people I've been talking to in podcasts, an interview with Emmanuel Todd that came out in France earlier this week. Emmanuel Todd, if you don't know, he's probably the only French intellectual that understands the current geopolitical and geoeconomic chessboard. He is a historian, demographer, a political scientist, anthropologist. He gave an interview where the headline is a bomb. Translating literally what he said, Trump's job will be to manage the American defeat against Russia. So, brutal. Question to you and to our audience. How can a president of the United States sell this to American public opinion? And how can the American elite, that's more important, much more important than Trump 2.0, how can the real American elites, the old fortunes, the old aristocratic families from the East Coast, the Atlanticist leaders of the international financial markets, how can they cope with that, which is becoming a historical fact, the defeat in the black soil of Novorossiya? So for the empire, it's a no way out. They have no idea. The political class, the managerial class, and the elites behind, the donors of both parties, they are absolutely stunned. So what is their default mode in a case like this? It's what Michael Hudson brilliantly described with one word. Michael Hudson said that the official American policy now, irrespective of this changing of the guard in the White House, is chaos. So now this is the empire of chaos reloaded. No question about that.
It's incredible.
And exactly. And and if we expand to what the empire with the changing of the guard is offering the world, even before Trump comes to power, this annexation dementia that if we want it, we can go there and grab it. And that applies to everything. Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, soon the whole of South America. You know, there's going to be a Monroe, Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, the whole of Mexico. And soon, why not? South America, everything. So the Western Hemisphere, as the Americas are described by the State Department in Washington, they can be annexed by the empire of chaos. And the most extraordinary thing is that because Trump is spelling it out, and maybe he'll be spelling it out day after day, this will be normalized. And if it ever happens, people have already interiorized that. It will look normal. It will look predictable. So it's the whole process is fascinating because it's extremely subtle and it's a predictive programming organization. And that's why it's so insidious and so dangerous. Go ahead, please.
It's crazy. But you're asking questions, and I'm so tempted to respond, but I'm the interviewee here, so I'm going to restrain myself, and I'm going to keep to the line of the interviews. But I will love to have you again. Then on my
go
channel.
ahead. Let's turn it upside down.
No, come on, man. But we're going to have this conversation in Portuguese very, very soon. I want to have this conversation in Portuguese with you as well in a time coming very soon. But
Portuguese is not my language anymore. My language is English. I don't speak Portuguese. I rarely speak Portuguese.
Portuguese anymore? Yeah, me too. I mean, I speak more Spanish than Portuguese even because I'm based in Mexico and my family is from Mexico. But I still do Portuguese every now and then. But English when I can. So having said that, Pepe, you mentioned so many interesting things that I would love to dig in. Because, for example, your notion of chaos, and I would love to get into your ontology and understand your reading of how the world functions. Is it the world functioning or the movement of history provoked by the intention of individual men? Is it the spirit of ideas speaking through us? Or is it material conditions that produce movements in history? Like, what is your take? Because when you say they control the narratives and they use these narratives to produce chaos, it seems that there's a cause and effect that starts in an intention of a person, of an idea, of a vision, or a Machiavellic notion that they impose their vision on reality and then they change reality by imposing that idea? Or is it that because of material causes, geopolitical conflict, property, ownership, dignity, poverty, desperation, lack of justice, those material conditions actually produce the movement of history?
They interfere. In terms of shaping the narrative and shaping how the international system works, we know who controls it and we know how they control it. We know their techniques. It reminds me slightly after 9/11, even before the invasion of Iraq, shock and awe in Iraq in March 2003. I was following this story from the inside, in fact. American officials were saying, we control reality and you have to adapt to it. This went, I think it was on the front page of the New York Times at the time. Repeated over and over again because they felt invulnerable. They felt that their moment to forge the 21st century was there between 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq. And after that, the 21st century will be an American century, completely. And they were absolutely sure, and they were running the narrative and controlling the narrative. And at the time, the neocons were controlling everything. And remember when they were dismissing Europe as old Europe? And they didn't even talk about Russia and China, because Russia and China, they were in their process of reorganizing themselves. Russia at the time had years of Putin, not enough, and China was still growing, and China didn't have a foreign policy presence at the time. So it was only the unilateral hyperpower at the time. So they thought that this would go on for the rest of the decade and the rest of the century. And the whole thing was derailed when Putin reorganized Russia at several levels, including military level. And one day the American elites woke up to the fact that China was becoming a technological superpower, much earlier than they ever expected. And on top of it, with a strategic partnership between both. None of these thousands of think tanks in Washington, which I had the displeasure to visit when I lived in Washington, they never gamed these scenarios. And they never gamed these scenarios happening so fast and with a perfect entente between the leadership of Beijing and Moscow. So when they start to react, it's already too late. And that brings us to explosion of BRICS, the situation nowadays when we have BRICS at the vanguard of consolidating I prefer to call it multi-nodal world instead of multipolar. This notion is by former American Ambassador Chas Freeman. It's perfect to capture what is being formed. It's a series of nodes interconnecting and communicating to each other, integrating in an organic way, which is the vision of Xi Jinping and Putin for BRICS. And the leaders of BRICS, of course, are Russia and China. So, and that brings us once again to the beginning of our conversation, because what does the empire of chaos and their elites have to offer to counteract this historical process? Absolutely nothing.
Nothing, yeah. Yeah, we're just seeing their grotesque fall. You know, like in philosophy, they say that one way to tell when an empire is in decay is that they no longer produce any artistic value. And this is interesting because you can see that the USA is trapped in nostalgia. Everything they produce out of Hollywood is remakes, reboots, and prequels and sequels. They are trapped because their imaginary is trapped because they cannot move forward, because they don't exist in the future. Since they can no longer exist in the future, they can no longer project a vision that is inspiring to these new generations. But then it goes back to these questions that I want to ask you, connecting Donald Trump to Elon Musk, which I think it's probably the most nefarious marriage that we have at the moment between political power and techno-feudalism, in a way. Okay, so give me your take, Pepe, being a journalist, being a person with such educated points of view, but also very controversial. How do you feel this marriage, this nefarious marriage between politics and techno-feudalism, techno-capital and also neoliberalism is going to give birth to a new type of control of speech, censoring, modulation? How do we alter or access information regarding your point of view?
Well, Musk is a fascinating character because he's a chameleon. And because he doesn't owe anything to anybody apart from, let's say, secret contracts with the deep state. We all know about that, of course. He is a deep state creature. And the leeway that he has is permitted by the deep state. Space programs, Starlink, and all that. As an entrepreneur in the United States, it's absolutely out of the question that you can have this leeway if you're not, I wouldn't say totally controlled by that you owe significant slices of your life to the deep state. Trump is different. Trump is an outsider from the other side of the bridge, in fact. All of you who know New York well, Trump is from Queens. From the point of view of those exclusive clubs in Manhattan, those exclusive restaurants, he's an upstart from the other side of the river, from the wrong part of town. That drives him because he wants to prove not only to the New York aristocracy, but to that extremely corrupt swamp in Washington that he's smarter than all of them put together. We all know what happened during his first mandate. It was not exactly like that, right? Second mandate is different because now he has a popular mandate. And we cannot underestimate the power of Trump in deep America. It's very, very impressive. And they idolize him as one of us, even though he is a billionaire. And that proves to us his powers of seduction on a pop culture level are absolutely extraordinary. He is the consummate pop star. He doesn't need to sing. He doesn't need to tap dance. He doesn't need to go on movie, but he is a pop star. The problem is, does he have a strategic vision for the role of the US in the 21st century? No. What he does have, the whole thing around MAGA, in fact, is let's bring back jobs for those poor folks in the Midwest, for instance. Let's bring back everything that these horrible globalists delocalized back to Asia. Let's bring back a strong dollar. Let's fight those currencies that are undermining the dollar. And in his mind, it's the euro, the yen, everything, And of course, if we want to rewire the rules in terms of international law, we can do anything we want because we are still the hyperpower. That brings us to Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, etc. Exactly. It's a pop brand of imperialism with this techno-feudalist here. Yeah. I'm sorry?
No, I just wanted to comment on something very briefly, Pepe, before we move on, because I think there's a split that is. It was very easy to foresee the split between the alt-right and the neocons that constitute this very weird spectrum of the right in the US. And now we're seeing, because of this big fight that happened a couple of weeks ago regarding the HB1 visas. And the fact is that in the end, the interest of capital as a system, and an autopoietic, in a way, a system that intends first to perpetuate itself in power. So capital tends to be very logical about the way it structures relationships of power in order to keep control. And in a way, there's only a limit to where Trump can truly deliver to his promises for the working class versus what he owns to the capitalist class. Because in a way, he's endorsed, he's sponsored by powerful capitalists in America, and he has to respond to them before he responds to the voters, to the demos. So the democracy that we see in the US is more like another system of capital that is just exerting its force via sponsorship and lobbying. And I think the public is mostly manipulated to believe that their vote is going to alter their material conditions, but in the end, it never happens. When it gets to the hard points, politicians always respond to capital. So what do you think is going to happen after this split between the alt-right and the neocons, that now Trump is caught in the middle of this war? Because in a way, Elon Musk got wrecked a couple of weeks ago in Twitter, in X, because he was defending immigrant workers. That it was one of the main flags that Trump was running to emphasize with the basic worker. Like they were pushing Mexicans back to Mexico because they were taking jobs from Americans. But now, since his friend and his sponsor, it's okay with bringing Indian engineers, suddenly Trump, it's okay with bringing immigrant workers. How do you think this split is going to play out?
Oh, this is going to be fascinating to watch, because we're going to have all these internal contradictions of this so-called new model that is going to be installed in a few days, which we could describe it as pop techno-feudal hyper-capitalism. It's a new concoction, mixing all together, right? So you can imagine the amount of inner contradictions in this process. Starting with something that you just pointed out, very important. Everybody around Trump is a billionaire. Everybody that he's appointed for his cabinet is literally a billionaire or a billionaire in the making. The people who supported his campaign, from Musk to the Adelson family, all of them are billionaires. Their agendas on a techno-feudalist side, let's say Musk, and on an ultra-Zionist side, let's say Adelson and most people in his cabinet, they do not converge. Mm-hmm. And sooner or later, if any of these factions start pressuring him to, for instance, control immigration inside the U.S. when hypercapitalism in the U.S. needs foreign workforce, cheap workforce, exactly, which will be essential in this process, if this process ever takes off, of repatriating industries back to the U.S. It's not going to happen. He tried on Trump 1.0 and he did not. And it's not going to happen on Trump 2.0 as well. And if he is forced, then by the other vector we haven't even talked about, the deep state, on another crazy foreign adventure, which will probably be buying Israel's war against Iran. And considering that Trump doesn't know anything about Iran, and this I have from my sources in New York, some of them worked with Trump. So this comes from people who have direct access to him. He doesn't know anything about West Asia and much less about Iran and how West Asia is interconnected. For instance, he doesn't understand that now, for instance, Iran and Saudi Arabia are sitting at the same table inside BRICS, and they discuss geopolitics as well. He has no idea about that. He has no idea, for instance, that 3 days before he goes to power, Iran and Russia are going to sign a comprehensive strategic partnership, including everything, including military collaboration at the highest level. He's going to have to factor all that in case he is forced by the deep state into this suicidal Israeli war in the end, right? So I think all of us will be losing our sleep when these internal contradictions of this new model, they start clashing against it. It will be an electron shock in exponential speed, you know. And on top of it, from the outside, we're going to have Russia and China examining the whole thing from outside, you know, sipping their cognac, in the case of the Chinese, or their vodka, and just enjoying the show.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I hope we don't have to quote Einstein regarding his readings of what's going to happen after World War III. I hope it doesn't get to that. But Pepe, bringing it back, and I want to add my spoon to the conversation. And since we're both Brazilians, having tried to read this from Latin America, from America, you know, as a larger scope. Why do I say this? In a way, the U.S. was the model that was exported toward the colonies, you know, because we both know that there's no such thing as a free market. Nobody that is smart or rich wants a free market. People love control markets and they love interference. And like Elon Musk, he loves his dependence and his marriage to the deep state and the contracts to Starlinks and X and whatnot. So we know there's no such thing as a true free market or a liberal economy or a liberal democratic model in reality. But regardless, with the works of the think tanks like Heritage Foundation, Liberty Foundation, the Koch brothers, they are fighting a hardcore war to impose the liberal ideology, especially in South America. And we have already seen that, for example, Argentina lost the battle and now is paying a heavy cost of that defeat, of that ideological defeat. So do you think with the destruction and the decay of this liberal bourgeois democracy, are we finally going to give up on this blind trust of institutions, the circus that we call liberal democracy? Are we going to look at alternatives and stop demonizing naively the different models, even dictatorships or different models of government?
In the case of the Western Hemisphere, to be back to the State Department definition, and in the case of, I would say, a few selected nodes in Europe, number one would be probably Italy, some nodes of knowledge in Germany, not here in France. France is totally colonized by Brussels. Public opinion is different, but French elites, right? And the Netherlands, maybe a little bit of a fraction of Scandinavia. They're going to start looking east, and they're going to start paying attention to the integration of Eurasia. That's possible, but a minority. This already happens in a few academic circles, but they are completely marginalized. For instance, you know, they are in small channels, they talk among themselves, etc. The key battle, and the way that I explain it in my latest book, which the title is Eurasia Against NATO-Stan. This is, in a nutshell, this is what we are living. Eurasia integration, coordinated by Russia and China. That includes BRICS, but it goes way beyond BRICS, against the collective West, which I call NATO-Stan. US, Canada, and Western Europe. And this is the battle. And the battle now, even with a new administration in Washington, is a battle against Eurasia integration, a battle against BRICS. And it's a battle against the integration of all these multilateral organizations, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the projects of the New Silk Road, Chinese, APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which coordinates trade and investment across Asia-Pacific, which is where everybody who lives in Asia calls it. Nobody in Asia knows what Indo-Pacific means. This is some crap that was invented by think tanks in Washington, and only they don't even know what that means, you know. So we're going to have nodes outside of Eurasia and Afro-Eurasia, because this is a process that includes also Africa, that will start paying attention to what the other side of the world is doing. But it's a very, very long process, because once again, the battle of narratives. Academics, journalists, scholars, lawyers, liberal professionals who start to manifest an interest to see how this process, historical process is being conducted on the side of the world, they will be fought tooth and nail by the propaganda machine. This happens when we talk, for instance, to academics in Italy or in Germany, something that I do quite often. They always say, look, as soon as we write something about it, you know, the whole thing, we are immediately surrounded, demonized. We have professors losing their jobs in selected universities, that kind of stuff. No, it's really, really serious. But it has already started on some of the intellectual elites in the West, including elites across South America, even in Argentina. There is a very potent, dissident, highly intellectual circle in Buenos Aires, especially, that is against the destruction of Argentina operated by Milei. But for the moment, they don't have a voice. They are marginalized. Yeah. So that's the great thing. There, you see glimmers of hope here and there. But the way the process is being conducted, this organic process of integration conducted by especially the BRICS and Eurasia integration as a whole, they are paying attention to the Eurasia space, the wider Eurasia space, from Turkey to Vladivostok, let's put it this way, and to Africa, mostly. And in some scattered cases, South America, but on a trade, investment, connectivity point of view, like the Shanghai port in Peru. That Xi Jinping went there to inaugurate himself, which is basically what? The new Silk Roads in the South Pacific. Absolutely outstanding. Yes. So, you know, but and the strategy from the point of view of the BRICS, they have been refining it. I would say, considering the challenges, it's relatively fast. Last year, I spent almost half of the year in Russia last year following the Russian presidency of BRICS. So I was talking to Sherpas, to the guys from the BRICS Business Council, to working groups, to people who are working in different mechanisms, and what we started to call the BRICS Lab. Oh, let's test this hypothesis. Let's test this payment settlement mechanism, etc. So this is a gigantic lab. And the Russians managed, they organized a sort of decentralized running lab, studying models that they are started to test, they are still testing, they will continue to test, to apply short, medium, and long term towards the reorganization of the international system geopolitically and geoeconomically. So all of you in the audience, you can imagine the challenge and how complex the whole thing is. But if there were, we would bet on who would start this high-speed train rolling, it had to be Russian, because they have intellectual capital, physics and mathematics capital, technical capital, technological capital, some of the best universities in the world, some of the best thinkers, and they are inclusive. They are thinking not only in terms of Russia, they are thinking in terms of Eurasia as a whole, and in terms of the global majority as a whole, as Lavrov says literally every week. Lavrov is now using the terminology global majority. So if you are a Somali, if you are somebody in Java, you listen to the foreign minister of Russia, you understand what he's saying. He's talking about you as well.
You're suddenly included in the conversation where we were excluded for centuries.
Exactly, because, and that brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. The empire of chaos, by definition, is an exclusive, exceptionalist setup. We all know that. Sure. Exceptionalism applies essentially to American exceptionalism. And obviously, American exceptionalism cannot tolerate any other form of exceptionalism. Can you imagine? The Chinese could say, look, we have been exceptional for 5,000 years. And look at our record. Compare our record to yours. So we are the real exceptionals. Do the Chinese say that? No. The Chinese are inclusive. They come up with a concept that it's called community of a shared future for mankind. You cannot be more inclusive than that. You know, and this is their official policy. It's in all their official policy documents. It's very, very serious, you know. So that's the clash between inclusiveness on an Asian side, Confucianist, Taoist, Buddhist frame of mind, and American exceptionalism based on what they do. Control of narrative, forever wars, different declinations, and now even worse, supporting a genocide and supporting a terrorist regime in a former sovereign Arab nation. This is what they're offering the world.
Yeah, I love your recap, Pepe, because in a way, like we're even if we use different words to describe it, what I've been saying about the same topic is that what BRICS offers is a universalist, inclusive platform. Because it's universalist in the right sense, you know, like it's supposed to include diversity. Whether the metaphysics behind the liberal project, it's granular, is molecular. It aims towards the individual as the mastermind behind the project of history. And from this side of the world, from China, for example, like you said, no, it's a Confucian basis, but on top of that, there's a Marxist-Leninist tradition that found a way to adapt Marxist-Leninist theory to the concrete reality of China, which is something unprecedented. And, you know, and this was predicted by several scholars from the last century, that was the change in our direction of history was going to come from the merge between China and Russia. And when they come together, this course of events is unreliable, is undeniable.
And I'm sure you noticed, and our audience may have noticed as well, everything that the Chinese try to organize conceptually and explain conceptually, they always say with Chinese characteristics. So their because they writing of Marxism and socialism is socialism with Chinese characteristics. Which characteristics are the Confucianist, Taoist, and Buddhist?
Exactly. They adapt to the material reality because they are true dialecticians. They understand dialectics. Like versus the traditional, you know, abstract, divagant leftists from the West, that they are just like posturing Marxism without understanding materialism and dialectics. The Chinese, they're actually very serious about how to approach dialectics and materialism. So they actually apply dialectics to their own material condition that give birth to idealistic superstructures. It's really a wonder to see. A final question, Pepe, before I let you go, and sorry if I'm abusing of your time, but is regarding the comment from Trump from Trump trying to annex Denmark, Greenland. Because I think the next century, the next century is going to be the century of the seas. I think the naval conflicts and the dominance of the different routes is going to be fundamental to what we see as pre-shaping the next level of commerce around the world. So what do you make out of this comment? Because even though Trump is a clown and he's very daring with his comments, he's not naive by any means. So what do you think is behind this intention of approaching Denmark and Greenland?
Well, he receives reports from think tanks. So he can access any information he wants. He hasn't said the key words that, it started a process in his mind. We need Greenland. In fact, he didn't spell out the reason. Rare earth minerals, unexplored yet. And he didn't mention why he needs the US to control Greenland, because Greenland is in the Arctic. And the main reason is called Arctic Silk Road by the Chinese and Northern Sea Route by the Russians. This is something that very few people in the West have any idea about. It's the post-Suez Canal environment. And it's being organized essentially by the Russians, and the Chinese are on board. No wonder the Russians are building. They already have the largest fleet of nuclear icebreakers in the world, and they are building, as we speak, another 4 absolute state-of-the-art stuff. I was talking to people from Rosatom in Vladivostok a few months ago, and they were explaining to me, they were showing the city. They built a city to build the icebreaker. It's a kind of stuff that, it's really science fiction. But in Russia, these things, you see them in front of you. They show you the maquette, they show you the pics. If you want to visit later, we can organize a visit, etc. So when you go to Vladivostok, for instance, and you go to the Economic Forum in Vladivostok, which now I go every year, it's absolutely essential to understand not only the conquest of Siberia and the Far East by Russia, which replicates a process that the Chinese did in the conquest of the West Chinese style. In 1999, the Chinese decided, okay, we're going to have to conquer Xinjiang, Tibet, our Western regions, and modernize them. So they launched a Chinese-style mega project, and that includes now you take a high-speed rail train and you land in Lhasa, over 4,000 meters. Man. They built one of the most complex engineering feats in modern history, building a rail in the permafrost. So the Chinese can do anything, And the Russians are developing.
They're transforming deserts into woods. They're building the biggest dam. It's insane.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and they do it. And the Russians, their own way, with, of course, much less financial resources than the Chinese. This is what they're doing in the Far East and Siberia. And of course, their priority, which Putin has been reiterating this all the time in his speeches, is the development of Siberia and the development of the Northern Sea route, because climatological conditions permitting, it could be open all year round with the help of this fleet of icebreakers. And who's going to profit from it? It's cheaper, faster, and more effective than the Suez Canal. So BRICS nations will be the first ones to profit, especially the BRICS nations from Asia, who want to export to Russia and then afterwards to Europe. And soon, everybody. So this is the post-Suez Canal environment, So it's so important because it touches one of the key geoeconomic issue of the 21st century, which is connectivity corridors. And the Chinese, once again, they started the whole thing when they came up with the idea of the New Silk Roads, which is basically what? Connect China with everything to the west of China. All over.
Easy.
And the Russians is easy. And the Russians, their idea is the official name of their policy is Greater Eurasia Partnership. It's the same thing, connecting also geopolitically. And that's where BRICS comes in. And that's what for instance, the big news at the start of this week, what is it? Indonesia admitted as a full BRICS member. What does that mean?
I saw.
You have Southeast Asia disembarking at the heart of BRICS without even a pit stop. They went straight to the top. Now you're one of us, official. Seventh economy in the world, one of the biggest economies of the 21st century. By PPP is the seventh economy, soon is going to be the fifth. It's going to overtake another Europeans. The powerhouse of Southeast Asia, good relations with China, good relations with Russia, good relations with India. And so it goes, So can you imagine the elite in Washington looking at this? They simply cannot grasp these movements. It's too much for them.
This complexity. I agree. Yeah. I agree. They strive in chaos, misinformation, and propaganda, and materiality is being very persistent in forming new relations and symmetries of power. And Pepe, what breaks my heart listening to you is that in a way, I feel like we're so far in South America because we're balkanized, we're divided, we're fighting with each other. There's no consistency. There's no plans for integration. We see so much the domination of Western propaganda, like inflicting pain and poisoning the minds of young people with these meritocratic ideologies and these notions that we need more free market in order to strive. It really breaks my heart. As a final comment, do you have any hope for us in South America? Is there something to be done?
I cannot give you an insider point of view because I left Brazil a long time ago. I moved to Asia technically 30 years ago. I started I am an old school foreign correspondent, reporter, foreign correspondent, editor, etc. So I've been playing this game for a long time. But I started in the West, Western Europe and US, a little bit in Canada as well. And then 30 years ago, I said, no, I have to know Asia from the inside. So these past 30 years, most of my, maybe 80% of my time, I was spending living, traveling, studying, and understanding and writing about Eurasia integration. That's why I go back to the theme Eurasia integration so much, because I've seen this in different nodes. Living in Southeast Asia, living in Hong Kong, going to China all the time, traveling to Central Asia, going to Turkey, going to West Asia, following the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, all that. So after 30 years, the point of view that you have as a Brazilian and as a nomad is, in a sense, auspicious because you see how these changes that you have followed for 3 decades, they are starting to materialize everywhere. And I assume that will apply to South America one day. I haven't followed South America for the past 3 decades, but I'm sure that there are no auspicious nodes here and there, and you need to connect them.
No, for sure. I think as you have said and you have articulated so well during this interview, these large pieces are moving, and in a way, their gravitational forces are pulling other pieces around them towards a direction. We're more seeing how this plays out, but the direction has a momentum of itself. But Pepe, mi amigo, first of all, it's a big pleasure to finally talk to you. I don't know if you recall, but we met in Kazan briefly. We were about to give an interview together.
Briefly, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, because I just said hello because I know you by reputation, but I don't know if you knew me. But we met briefly in the Kazan forum. You were busy, I was busy as well, so I didn't have time to have this conversation. But truly, for me, this has been a big pleasure. I'm a big fan of your work. Also, my channel is open. Yeah, anytime you want to have a longer conversation in another language, we can try in another language, because it's weird to talk to a Brazilian in English. I'm feeling like a traitor. It's so weird.
No, but it happens with me all the time. I was talking to Nima. Nima is Iranian. He lives in Brazil. He speaks excellent Portuguese. And our interviews are in English.
We act like that. That's okay. So Pepe, again, thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time. I know everybody's super happy with the interview. Thank you so much for your insight, for your analysis. Is always a pleasure. My friend, thank you so much. I hope we can talk again very, very soon. Super. So that was Pepe Escobar, journalist, geopolitical analyst, a fellow Brazilian that has been living abroad, so I can relate a lot. We are reaching the end of our show. Now we're going to go to a very quick break, and we're going to come back to closing remarks.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Not George Galloway, but Diego Ruzzarin filling in for my friend. But don't worry, he's going to be back on Sunday, and I know you're all very excited to see him again. So we're going to read a couple of extra comments that we were getting on our YouTube channel. And remember, you can scan the QR code on the corner to comment and actually try to create some sort of civilized debate about these important topics that we're talking here today. So the first comment is from Karaoke Stars. What a cool name. And she says, brilliant modes from Brazil, Mexico. We have so much in common. It proves the world condemns Israel, globalists, and criminals. I think we can all agree to that. And if you add that we love Mexican food, I think it will be a very, very universal comment. So thank you so much. Next one is for Richard Graham. An empire is at its most brutal and desperate when it's in decline. Yeah, I agree 100%, Richard. This is why we have to be very aware and very careful about what happens right now. It's like when they are in decline, they will reach for their most desperate measures in order to get out of their precarious situation. And just like Harry Kissinger said, the only thing that is more dangerous than being an enemy to the United States is being an ally to the United States, because you become like a lamb to slaughter when it needs to sacrifice something in order to gain something narcissistically or egoistically. They will sacrifice their allies. So yeah, I agree 100%. An empire is very dangerous when it's near the decline. So now from Christine Peach, it says, correct. Trump knows little about foreign dynamics. He relies on the last person he spoke with on the subject. It's very scary. Yeah, you even spoke like Trump a little bit at the end when you said scary. Billions and billions and billions. But it's also very true. I think that it's almost stereotypical and predictable, the fact that people from the United States of America can hardly recognize other countries on a map. I wonder if their politicians suffer from the same type of lack of education and lack of awareness. So it's true that they're very naive and influential, easily influenced by the last people they've spoken to. But then again, just like Pepe reminded us during the very bright interview he gave, that they have access to all these think tanks. And these think tanks, they're not, in a way, objective. They have very, very subjective intentions. Most of them are sponsored by big capital, and they try to perpetuate the material conditions that allow for the infinite replication of capital. So we have to be aware that Trump also is influenced heavily by these intentions of capital. And the last few comments, first from Amiri, de-dollarization is the key. This one is a very interesting one. The topic of de-dollarization has been coming again and again. But what I understood from this last meeting of BRICS in 2024 in Kazan in Russia is that de-dollarization is not necessarily fundamental for the multipolar world to emerge. I think de-dollarization will happen naturally as the US completely loses relevancy in the global commerce arena. Now, China still needs the US to be able to absorb the excess of production from China, because China produces more than they can consume. So they need other regions in the world to absorb that excess of production. And at the moment, most of that excess of production is being shipped to the US. China, since China holds most of the debt from the US dollar, China could choose to de-dollarize or speed up the de-dollarization process, but it's not in China's best interest to do so. They still need the US to absorb that excess of production. So I think the process of de-dollarization is going to be slower than we think, but it's not necessarily a bad thing for us that are aspiring for a post-Anglo-liberal world order. And the last comment from Sean Moon, it says, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Beautiful, comrade, beautiful. A completely financialized economy combined with endless war, Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. Perfect. Nothing to add. I love when people cite communist works and communist books on the show. Thank you so much for your comment, Sean. So here's an email from John. He says, Diego, Trump can buy Canada from his own Amex cards. Canadians can then be just like Americans. They can buy guns and not have any healthcare. Great show from John from Macau, SRA, China. John, thank you so much for your email. I don't know if I've heard that Trump is in debt and the US is in heavy debt. But regardless, I love your satirical take on the fact that it would be lovely to become American in order to enjoy the pleasures of free fentanyl and then infinite debt and not having a house and any prosperity. I guess, I don't know what's the selling pitch on people trying to convince other countries to be like America. So yeah, I agree with your comment regarding the last. So a couple of final comments now from my YouTube channel. First, the chatter, Cherry Cupcake, great name by the way. Diego, you are doing a fantastic job tonight. Moving interview from Dr. Mustafa. I agree 100%. The interview from Dr. Mustafa was even hard for me to do. Like even listening to these, to the size, the quantity, the intensity of the violence is always moving. And even like I've been talking about this topic from Palestine since the very beginning, for the last 500 days. And I felt the pain and I cannot even imagine what it's like for someone like Dr. Mustafa with his commitment, with his knowledge, with his ability to be so close to the conflict and close to the violence. And I agree, it was a great interview. Another comment from Culture Bridge, Diego rocks. I like him. Thank you so much, Culture Bridge. I appreciate that. Now from Danny Z. Oh my God, Diego, I am so happy to see you here. Soy tu fan, te veo y sigo tu canal. I'm a huge fan of George too. Wow. Thank you so much. I think you guys know by now that me and George have a lot in common. Most of our worldviews, our political views, we have become very good friends very quickly. I'm, again, super happy to be here. Very honored by the opportunity to host the show. It's slightly different than what I do normally, but I'm glad that you guys are enjoying. A couple of final comments from Willie Duffy. He says, George, your fill-in was excellent. Chef's kiss. I love the chef's kiss. It's something I do a lot, and I appreciate the comment. I will take that one at heart, and I will bring it with me home and cherish it. The final one concerned Patriot. Such a relaxed, humorous, candid, and informative show. I love it. That's what I aim for. You know, like we live in a society of spectacle. If things are not entertaining, people won't pay attention to them because we are constantly competing with cat memes and dancing ladies on TikTok. So whatever we do, it has to be upfront entertaining. So it's kind of hard to make critical theory, desk philosophers, and geopolitics entertainment, but we do our best. I'm so glad you enjoy it. Now, we're going to close the show. George is going to be back on Sunday, so you guys can see him again. And then you guys can have a great day. I hope you really enjoy it. I hope you had as much fun as me. And we'll see you very, very soon. I hope I get invited again, unless I don't plan on stealing anything from the set. I think I behaved pretty well. I think I didn't say anything too insulting or misbehaving. So, George, if you want to later on, I hope you can invite me back. Guys, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Have a good night.